Hi, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to what I've got to babble on about. It's always enjoyable to know that this podcast reaches a few people that have got the same passion as what I do for these little trees in pots. So I wanted to whack this podcast together to talk about a bit of a follow-on from the previous podcast, which was primarily on fertilising. And since then, I've had quite a few conversations with people in the workshop about different types of fertiliser and organics and what if you did this and what if you did that. And it got me thinking about my approach to bonsai in general and some pretty simple guidelines that I use for the actions that I take. So I want to go through that with you. I just want to talk also about another conversation I've had about potential on stock. So that'll be part of this podcast. And we're at a really busy time of year in spring, at the start of spring, where everything seems to be growing like crazy. It's post repotting, so get to look at a lot of the trees in a new light with beautiful new pots and lovely fresh new foliage. So that's today's podcast. So stick around. All right, so the fertilizer podcast got me thinking, and it's not. This doesn't have anything to do with the fertilizing process or anything like that. But I was getting asked about whether there were better fertilizers or whether I'd thought about doing something with a higher nitrogen component or whatever it is, adjusting via chemical fertilizers, the NPK, for the results that I'd get. And it broke down for me to think, well, okay, I know why I use these fertilizers, but how can I explain it to someone why I do things the way that I do them? And there was a couple of simple bullet points that I wrote down when I was thinking about it for this podcast, and it was every action that I take in regard to my bonsai, which includes fertilizing, spraying, watering, all that sort of stuff, it's got to be easy. It's got to be easy because I've got a lot of trees, and if it was difficult, it would be one of those things that would be postponed or put onto the back burner and it wouldn't be actioned. So by making everything I do easy and effective, then I will continue to do it. So, for instance, an example is the tea bag fertilizing method. Again, it's not for everybody, but it works really well for me because I know that once a month during the growing seasons, I have to fill these tea bags and go and apply them to the trees, to the bonsai surface. Now, that's relatively quick and easy for me, and I know it gives me about a month's worth of effective fertilizing per tea bag. So it's a really simple, easy method. The other part to it is it's got to be repeatable. Like, it can't just be, I don't do anything with my trees just as a once-off. So when I take an action, it's got to be something which I can repeat time and time and time again. Now, the fertilizing method that I use is definitely repeatable. It's easy, it's repeatable. It's got to be measurable too. Measurable is really, really important. I think that's something that maybe is skipped over when you talk about varying methodologies from year to year or changing things like your soil mix, because you can't get a measurable result from year to year based on what your actions have been with your bonsai if there's a constant evolution of ideas. Now, I am 100% up for changing things. If they're not working or if there's a better way to do something, then I'm the person that's there with the pom-poms in the background saying, yes, let's consider this, let's have a look at it. But it's got to be measurable. You can't just do things because it seems like a good idea. It's got to be, okay, well, why am I doing this? What's the result going to be at the end of it? How can I measure whether it's been successful or not? And that's the difficult thing when you're taking guidance from people, from anybody, including me, is to work out whether the result is going to be exactly what you want it to be. Is it going to be predictable? That's the other thing. So it's easy, it's repeatable, it's measurable, and it's predictable. So, for instance, I'll just throw into the mix a Japanese black pine. I know that with my black pines, if I apply a certain amount of fertilizer per tree, then I will get predictable results, not with the spring growth, but when it comes to the next stage in the tree's progress, which is the decandling process in our December period. For me, I know that I can get a very predictable response by using the methods and processes and procedures that I do by looking after my trees. And that becomes really, really important. And the predictability of your actions comes from experience. Sometimes you learn things the hard way, but when you learn things and they start to work, then you stick with it until there's a good reason, until there's something which is measurable, that you can make a change to the way that you're doing something. You stick with the same methodologies. You see the process out. You don't chop and change things partway through because there's going to be no consistency and no measurability. The other part that I focus on is accuracy. I am very consistent with everything that I do to make sure that I'm accurate with my processes and also the mediums that I use, the fertilizers that I use. Everything is to a certain standard, and I'm really, really accurate on when I do my fertilizing, my repeatability for it. So the timing in between my fertilizing as well, I try not to let that slip or change, because when it comes back to the predictability side of things, if variables change along the way, if your timing for things changes, your fertilizer that you're using changes, then the predictability can suddenly go out of the window as well. It's not so easy when things keep on changing to make sure that you're going to end up exactly where you think you're going to. It's not where you need to end up, it's where you think you're going to end up to. So you've got to make sure that, when you're doing things like even pinching, like at the moment, Japanese maples, as I mentioned, all maples. Pinching is one of those things that's on the agenda every single day for my trees. Now, if I become inconsistent with that, if I'm not accurate with how I'm pinching and where I'm applying the pinching to on the new growth, if it's not done on a consistent time basis, so if I'm not doing that every day, if I'm allowing these shoots to grow for 5 or 6 days, then pinching, and then 5 or 6 days and then pinching again, some of those shoots are going to be brand new. Some of those shoots are going to be 5 or 6 days old. So therefore the length variable is going to change significantly for those new shoots. Therefore, when I look at my tree and I go back and I try and assess the predictability of my pinching process, when I look back on it in months to come, when the growing has stopped and there's no more pinching required, I'll find that I'll have varying lengths of internodes, I'll have varying lengths of branches, and I'll be scratching my head saying, is that because the fertilizer? Is it because of my watering? Is it the genetics of the tree? Is it the pinching process that I applied? And you cannot accurately determine what the results are caused on your tree. Now, this stuff doesn't matter really. If you've got a tree that's very young in its development, then this sort of stuff, this consistency and this accuracy and this repeatability is not so important. But as they become more and more refined, and as you get to the pointy end, this stuff becomes super critical. If you want to maintain trees at the highest level, then you've got to dedicate the time and the processes needed to make sure that they fulfill their potential. Otherwise, you're treading water a little bit, and it's not the most desirable to look back, years down the track and say, was it this, was it that, was it? Maybe it's just the inconsistency of your approach. Maybe it's that what you applied to the tree wasn't done in a measurable fashion. Maybe it wasn't a repeatable process that you used on the tree. So it's really important to make sure that throughout this whole process of getting your trees to the pointy end, which is where we all strive to get, even when we get there, we never fully get there, but we always strive to get to that point. It's a matter of making sure that these little things, the 1%ers I talked about in previous podcasts, they all come into play. And it's this measurability, the repeatability, and the accuracy which provides us with predictable results. One of the things that I love most about what I do with Bonsai Matsu and the communication I have with people is the fact whether a piece of material has potential. Now, I get asked this all the time. What do I think? What are your thoughts? What should I do? Where should this go? And I love it. It's awesome because it allows me to constantly change the way that I interact with a tree. And what I mean by that is I have trees that are I've had for a long time. So my interactions with them are pretty consistent, as I was just mentioning. So I find that it's very rare for me to be able to look at a piece of material that I don't necessarily have in my hands and get asked what my opinion is. I do a lot of workshops with people, a lot of courses where a lot of new material comes through the workshop. But the breadth of the species that come across my messaging systems, email, whatever it is so diverse and so wide that I look at the trees and think, I would never think about acquiring that tree, or I would never get one of that species in my stock, because that's not where my mindset is at the moment. And I love it that I get to be involved with different trees at different stages. And one of the most common things I get asked is this a piece of rubbish or does it have potential? It might be a piece of stock that someone's been growing for a very long period of time, really hasn't done very much because it's young on their bonsai radar and they're not very far along their bonsai journey. And my repeated answer is yes, it's got potential, because I think, and this is hand on heart, I honestly believe that almost every piece of material that gets offered up to be bonsai by anyone that's listening to this, it's got a future. What that future is dependent upon you and the vision that you have to see a future in it. And that's the difficult part. It's that ability to see where the tree can develop that comes very much from experience, from growing trees for a large number of years, and also having a lot of experience with different things, that you get to know what's going to happen, the predictable outcome for that tree if you do certain things to it. And that's where the potential comes into it. And as I said, I love the fact that I can maybe open up people's minds to what a tree could be, how the future bonsai could be, because purely I can sort of look at a piece of stock and say, yes, if that was bent this way and that was cut off, then this would grow and then that would happen. And yeah, sure, you might need a sacrifice branch. It's probably 5 years in development, but then I honestly believe it could be this. And when I work with people face to face in the workshop, sometimes they scratch their head, raise their eyebrows, and go, "Really? In this tree, you can see that?" And it's honestly true. I think that if you picked up a piece of material, not asking yourself, is this going into the recycle bin? It's like, okay, what do I do to take the next step? You don't need to know the final outcome. You don't need to know everything about this tree and what it's going to look like. You don't need a photo to work to with a plan written beside it. But what you need to do is have a process that you follow to start developing these things. Nabari trunk, number 1. Primary branches, number 2. Secondary branches, number 3. Ramification, number 4. The golden rule, don't keep jumping along to steps in advance until you've accurately and thoroughly completed the steps prior to the next step. It might be that you start working on secondary branches while you're still finalising primary, but really the trunk, the nabari, the basic fundamentals should be what you look for when you're looking at a fresh piece of material, or a piece of material where you can't see the potential. Break it back. Don't look at the periphery. Don't look at all the shag of foliage and the shag of branches. Break it back to the very basics. Start looking for a clear trunk line. Spin the tree around. The turntables are awesome for this, where you get them at eye height, put the tree on the turntable, spin it round, just like what you see people do when they do demonstrations or workshops. Look at any video on YouTube of someone doing a demonstration. You'll see them at the start, if you're lucky enough to get the very first part where they very first see that raw piece of material that they're going to work on. First thing they'll do, they'll sit down, they'll spin the tree around, they'll have a look at it, and they'll try and find what their front's going to be based on the trunk position that they've got and the branch placement. And then they get into the work. They don't start hacking things off. And if the video just shows you them hacking things off, then the video is not complete. It doesn't show you the entire process. So when you find that you're questioning the potential of a piece of material, just stop, go back to the very, very basics, trunk and nabari. Where's the front on this tree? Spin it around, have a look at it and go, there it is. I can see it. Start thinking about the possible height for the tree as well. You might have this thing cut to be 50 centimetres tall now. Would it look nicer if it was 20 centimetres tall? Would it look nicer if it was a metre tall? You don't have to be stuck with what's in front of you right now. What you have to do is you have to develop a plan for it. Switching back again to what we just talked about at the start of the podcast with the actions that I take, they've got to be easy, got to be repeatable, got to be measurable, got to be accurate. The same applies to exactly this piece of material that you've got in front of you. That when you're starting the process, it's got to be measurable. Okay, so if I cut this off, what's going to happen next? Something will grow from here. All right, so something grows from there. What's got to happen to that before I take the next step? All right, that's got to get to this part here. Right, develop a plan. If you can, keep notes on it. Keep a diary system. Keep some kind of track on it. I've got customers that put markers on sacrifice branches with little notes. Do not cut, review in 12 months' time, and put the date on there. So they set an agenda for themselves to not keep going out there and snipping away when they see one of these colourful little tags on a branch. Okay, stop. What do I need to do? Right, it's only been 4 months. Leave it go. Let it go through. Let it run through and become what it's intended to become. Don't take action too early. You've also just got to remember that what you're looking at is a current stage in that bonsai's life. Whether it's not even a bonsai yet, whether it's just a stick in a pot, it's just a stage in that tree's life. It can change, it can develop, it can evolve, and it can always become more than what it is right now. How that happens, how quickly that happens, and all the other factors that happen around it, it's entirely up to you. It's like a piece of clay that's in your hand that you can start to mould. Unlike making a cup or a vase or a pot with a piece of clay, where the end result is known in a relatively short period of time, your bonsai can develop over 20 years. Doesn't need to take that long, of course. I'm not saying that everything you're going to work on is 20 years down the track, but it can happen over a very slow period of time. And I don't think it's positive to look at things and say, well, okay, how long will this take? Because it's not about the result, it's about the process. That's where the enjoyment comes from. It's that path that we take that allows us to thoroughly enjoy bonsai, and that's what bonsai is all about. That's why we're growing these little trees in pots, not because we're at the end point and have majestic pieces of artwork all sitting on our benches. It's because we go through a process that keeps us involved, that keeps us doing things with nature, it keeps getting our hands dirty. It makes us feel good. It makes us smile. We get to see progress on things, and we get to see changes in season. We get to see flowers. We get to see new leaves. We get to see those leaves fall off. We get to see the structure of the tree in the winter. That's why we're doing bonsai. That's why we're loving it. That's probably the reason why you're listening to this podcast. It's because every facet of what we do in bonsai is a driver for you to continue to do it. If you wanted to, or you got enjoyment only from having finished trees on your bench, then you're an art collector. You're not a bonsai enthusiast like us. Nothing's static with the trees. Everything changes. And even the best laid plans, and this is what you really need to factor in, even the best laid plans that you have for your bonsai, for this new bonsai or this tree that you've got in front of you that you're developing, things change. Whether it's a bud getting knocked off, whether it's a possum eating something off the back of the tree, whether it's birds landing on it and knocking it off the bench, whatever it is, things change. Just change your plan, vary your plan, maybe go back to that first step and look for the potential, or look for the first step again and go, okay, now that's gone, that's not an option. Don't cry about it for too long. Just move on. I've talked about this before, that those setbacks, those forced redesigns that we've had to do, all of us, with our trees, they're a real opportunity. And I guarantee anyone's had to do one, say 2 or 3 years ago. Go back out now, look at the tree that you're forced to make the changes on, and think about how you look at that tree. Not how the tree looks, but how you think about that tree now. And I guarantee you, you're not sitting there moping about a branch that was knocked off 2 years ago, an apex that was smashed. You're looking at the tree with fresh eyes and seeing how it's developed over the last 2 years. And they change. They change so quickly that you can quickly move on from all this stuff. When I talk about potential with stock, how much potential it's got, I think, is directly related to how much experience and what stage you're at on your bonsai journey. People see things very differently. If you're fresh to bonsai, I mean, like say within 12 months, 2 years, then you'll be beaming. Everything's got potential. You'll be grabbing things and you're a bit out of control with it because you're growing things and you sort of haven't fine-tuned what it is that you love about bonsai. You've got a passion for growing trees, and that's really to be encouraged and to be fed. But the potential side of things is everything's got potential. What is the potential? I don't know. It's just something in there's got potential. That's cool. No problems. Those that have got 10 plus years experience with bonsai suddenly look at things very differently because you've got the experience to know how long things are going to take, and that the investment that you need to make, which is your time, which is the most valuable thing anyone can invest in bonsai, is possibly not worth it. And that's where I love these sale days that happens at bonsai shows and whatever else, or on Marketplace or something, because what's possibly not worth the investment for one person is a piece of gold for someone else. And I strongly encourage people, when you look through your collection, if you feel that you can't see the potential, or not that you can't see the potential, but you can't be bothered making the investment, move it on to someone who is going to give it 120% enthusiasm to that tree, because that's what they need. You'll find that, whether you admit it out loud or not, but you'll find that when you have trees on your bench that you're not enthusiastic about, they miss repotting, they miss pruning, they miss fertilising, they miss the care that they probably should get. They definitely miss weeding, and they sort of get pushed to the back of the pile, and they're kept there, until something happens, until there's a reason for change, whether unfortunately they die or you move them on. Well, what I'd suggest is, when you start doing that with the trees on a consistent basis, and be honest with yourself, which ones they are, sell them, move them on. And I just had a conversation with someone the other day about potential value of trees to be sold and the cost they should put on them. And it's like, well, what's your requirement for selling them? And they're going, well, that's irrelevant. And I said, no, it's not really, because if you just want to move them on and give them to a good home, your price is a lot less than if you're emotionally attached to something and you see it as a value. Now, if you see them as a value, then you price things accordingly. It may not be to market, may not find a buyer for it, but you price them based on your perceived effort and your investment of your time into that tree. When you just want to move them on, you break it down, cost of the pot, how long have you had it for, what did the tree cost you? All right, factor in a little bit here, a little bit there. That's your price that you sell. And you'll find that very often, more often than not, the trees sell when they're priced like that. When they're priced to make money, or they're priced as a piece of art, then the prices are very, very different. And they may not turn around. I'm not saying you won't sell them, but I think that if you, and I'm not talking about selling your most valuable trees, I'm talking about turning over stock that has lost its potential. That's what this section of the podcast is about, is whether a piece of material has potential. And I think that from my experience, I'm very lucky when I sell a piece of material that I think, that would be better served being in someone's hands who's fresh and enthusiastic. Then I'm really lucky because I get to see that tree come back through the workshop over and over and over again, and I get to hear that person when I talk to them, and see the look in their eyes and think, it was worth every penny moving on that piece of material, because that bonsai now has got such a bright future ahead of it. It's developing probably 10 times faster than what it would have if it was in my hands, and I get to still have an involvement here or there, and it's really, really pleasing to see that. So I'm lucky from that point of view. But I just encourage you to look at your trees, look at the potential they've got, find a spark, find something that makes you spend time with them. If it doesn't, then it's possibly time to shuffle it on.
I spent my youth dropping coins in a wishing well. In hopes one day that I would find.
Just finished repotting season recently, and I just want to run through what I am preparing for next. Obviously, repotting is a major thing for the trees, for me, for coordinating, for making sure that I've got everything covered off. So I wanted to run through, I suppose, what the next things are that I start working on. There's a couple of minor ones, a couple of major ones. So after repotting, one of the things that I've found that happens quite rapidly is weeds. Weeds, the bonsai practitioner's worst enemy, as far as I'm concerned. Those things grow rapidly. If only our trees grew as fast as what the weeds do, it'd be awesome. But they are a right pain, and they seem to take off very quickly. So I am deliberately trying to not turn my back on them and make sure they stay up with them. Best weed to remove is one that's just a baby. When they start getting hold, it becomes quite difficult. So that's one thing that I do definitely try and stay on top of. The second thing is the rapid growth after repotting. So I'm only talking now about the trees that have been freshly repotted. One thing that I definitely am mindful of is that rapid growth that trees get once they've been repotted, and it's up to me to set pruning targets. From that I mean, what am I trying to do with this new growth that's rampant? I've got to harness it. I've got to make sure they get the best bang for my buck. So what do I do with it? And for every tree that I've got, I look at it and think, okay, so I'm going to let this one shoot out. Am I going to pinch it as soon as it starts to grow? What am I going to do? So I've got my pruning targets that I keep an eye on. I work out when I'm going to be starting to prune this thing based on the target length of the new foliage. So I'm talking about deciduous specifically. The other is that I am heading towards decandling. Every month that goes by puts me one step closer to decandling for my black pines. So I need to make sure that I am very mindful of having even, consistent growth on my black pines. So I'll have been doing a lot of candle pinching at the moment. Same as with white pines. I've got a couple of white pines that I've freshly repotted and they've gone berserk. So no fertiliser for my white pines at this stage, but the new candles, just from purely repotting, have meant that they've all taken off. So I've been doing quite a lot of candle pinching. So the candle pinching happens where you take the strongest and you pinch them, and then the next round I get the next batch of strong candles as they've elongated, pinch the tips off those, and it keeps distributing resources back further and further down to the weaker buds throughout the process. There's a couple of videos on my YouTube channel if you're interested on white pines and black pines. But yes, I've been doing a lot of that and keeping an eye on uncontrolled or unregulated growth with my pines that have been freshly repotted. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm keeping an eye on the wiring on those trees as well. With the rapid growth, comes rapid thickening. Rapid thickening means cutting in with wire as well. So on a tree that maybe hasn't been repotted, the wire, I wouldn't be quite so stressed about it or worried about it. I'd let it stay there a bit longer. Trees that have been freshly repotted, that are growing like crazy, I am finding that I'm removing the wire far more frequently across the tree. So that's something else that I'm working on. Now this next thing that I'm working on at the moment sounds a bit ridiculous, because as I look outside, I've got rain coming down. It's about 17 degrees outside and it's cold, it's chilly. We are at the start of spring, so the daylight hours are getting longer, but in Melbourne, Australia, there's not a lot of warmth at the moment. It's actually, quite cool. But what I am working on for all of my trees is I'm starting my preparations for summer. I know that seems like a mile away before the hot weather gets here, and I'm worrying about 40 plus degree or 45 degree days. But the temperature is changing drastically year on year. We are getting longer, hotter, drier periods more frequently. So I find that by being prepared like a Boy Scout for this stuff, I don't trip across it. So when summer gets here, I can basically flick a switch and I can activate my summer plans, which are very, very important to me and to my trees. Especially if I need to not be with my tree for a hot day, I need to make sure that I've got plans in place or actions I can take that will ensure I can keep the environment cool and I can protect my trees during the peak period of the day. So some of the preparations that I'm doing for summer at the moment are my watering system. I've had this same watering system now for a very long period of time, and it's been extremely reliable, but I still have to test it. Every year I do the same thing. I go and test the individual watering heads. I test the system itself. I make sure there's no flaws in it. I make sure firmware's up to date. I make sure that I've got no chinks in my armour when it comes to my watering system. And even though I'm here and I'm watering my trees by hand, I still run the automated system quite regularly just so I can keep an eye on it. For instance, the other day I was walking around doing the testing, and I've got, I think it's 16 or 18 zones, 18 different lines of watering system around the yard, and I run them all one after the other. And I was walking around, and all of a sudden there's a bush in the garden that had grown over part of the water hose, and just as I was walking around, I heard this noise, this gushing of water, this hissing. And I went, what's that? So I looked around at the sprinkler system, still running all fine. All the heads looked okay. Everything was getting water as it should have been. But it wasn't a crucial time because it had been raining. The pots were still all wet. So I couldn't accurately tell whether the system was doing exactly what it should have been doing. All I knew was I was giving it the green tick saying, yeah, good job, it's all working. Then as I walked around, I heard this hissing. So I pulled back this big plant that had grown, this juniper that had grown over the watering system, and somehow I must have, when I've dug a hole or something like that, I must have hit part of the hose, and so this part that was underground had a chip or a slice through part of the hose system, and it was gushing water out under pressure, but it was covered by this tree and it was also partly underground. So there's no way, if I hadn't been listening and walking around and paying attention to what I was doing, there is absolutely no way I would have been able to tell that this thing was stuffed. And it's not now that I'm worried about it. It's when it's 45 degrees and I'm nowhere to be seen, and all I've got is a camera system to tap in to have a look at this system and go, yeah, good job. And I come home a couple of days later and I find something cooked that I would absolutely kick myself in the bum for not having done the right thing. So I think it's really important to get your watering system done right now. Take your time, make sure it's completely foolproof and there's no chinks in your armour. The other is a shade cloth. Shade cloth is one of those great things that we can put up and we can take down. So for me, as with probably 99.9% of the people listening, my shade cloth comes out twice a year. Comes out during the winter period when we've got frosts. So I put my more delicate trees under there that I know are prone to frost dieback. And then it comes out for the hottest period of the year as well. So I have a retractable system where I can pull it out and put it back, pull it out, put it back. And the key with it, going back to the start of the podcast, everything that I do, one of the requirements is it's got to be easy. So if my shade cloth took me more than about 30 seconds to pull out or retract, then I probably wouldn't do it. You'd probably look at it and go, no, I think it'll be okay. Or you might leave it up longer than what it needs to be. You put it up once and go, yeah, it's too hard. It's going to take me half an hour to put this thing away. I'm just going to leave it. So I've got a good system that I do keep an eye on, and I test. I make sure that it flows smoothly, make sure that if there's ropes that need replacement or wire that needs replacement, that I'm onto it. So when it does get to the critical times of the year, it works for me. It's really important to stay on top of it. The other is that I come up with a plan in the back of my head for my bench placement as well. Now, that's more so I've got enough room for the trees that I want to make sure that I can put away and protect. So when the time gets here, I'm not stacking things on the ground, or I'm not rapidly throwing something together where things can go wrong. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Every time I do this stuff, I try and make it that I minimise any issues that I'm going to have somewhere down the track. And if, I've got trees and it's, 45 degrees and it's blowing a strong northerly wind and I'm getting stuff knocked off the benches, or it's drying out rapidly and I can't keep up with maintaining it and looking after and protecting it and sheltering it, then I might put a tree in a position where something's going to happen to it. It's happened to me before, where I chuck things on benches and go, yeah, that'll do, got to go now, got to go to work. All of a sudden I come home, the thing's on the ground, it's got branches snapped off, and it's like, you idiot, why didn't you just put another bench out, or why don't you do this, or why don't you do that? So I make sure that I've got enough bench space in the sheltered areas, my future sheltered areas, when my shade cloth comes up, that I can make sure that my trees are adequately protected. Also go through and I prioritise the trees that need protection. So when it happens, I don't forget a tree. If you've got 10 trees, don't worry about it, just protect them all. When you've got 400 trees, you need to have an agenda set up, because you obviously, you may not be able to fully protect absolutely everything. So for me, my pines, they're all out in the full sun. They get the full whack of it. Same as my junipers, very little protection provided there. But when it gets to my deciduous, they do get a lot more shelter. So I've got to make sure that if, my collection's changed, or my trees have got bigger, or they're taking more room on the benches, that I can suddenly do a head count and go, all right, 50 maples. Have I got room for 50 maples in that sheltered area of my collection? Yes, no. If it's a no, then what do you have to do to fix the problem? And it's only a problem now until I solve it. Once I solve it, I've got the plan in place. So I do spend a lot of time during spring making sure that I've got boxes checked for summer. I don't want summer to be a problem for me. I want summer to be a breeze. I want it to be a time when I can enjoy the warm weather and sit around and have a beer and put my feet up and get some sun and not necessarily have to stress about my trees and if they're going to survive. I know that by preparing for it now, it means it's something that I can not worry about later on down the track.
Story to tell. How every regret so soulless empty life.
So that brings us to the end of another podcast. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure that you get out, look for potential in your trees, but most importantly, just pull those weeds out. Don't let the pots become overrun with them. No, I do mean it. Thanks for sticking around. And the plan for the next podcast is I've done a little bit of travelling lately around the beautiful country of Australia and been to a few different states. And what I found really interesting was the different form of trees in different environments, which you forget when you don't travel and you see the same trees all the time in the same environment, and you're sort of in the rut of what you're doing. You can sometimes forget how amazing trees are, full stop, and that they grow to their environment and their conditions they're exposed to. So I want to talk a little bit about trees in a natural form and how it applies to bonsai, how I apply it to bonsai, how I seek inspiration from it, not to try and mimic anything, or not to try and make my trees look like they're grown in a windblown paddock in the middle of nowhere in outback Australia, but it's how I possibly use some of that inspiration when I'm working with trees and wiring and shaping and pruning and positioning in pots and all that sort of stuff. So I want to talk about that, and I'm also going to start on the fundamentals of design basics and how it applies, or how I apply it to bonsai. So interesting things that anyone from an art background will know, but for people that aren't artistic, that possibly don't see themselves as artistic, I think that there's a lot we can gather from good design principles and how we can use it with our bonsai. And again, not to force anything a certain path, but we can incorporate things to create them more visually interesting and exciting, and offer more potential than simply a repeat of something else that we've done. So that whole approach to cookie cutter bonsai, it's not for me. I don't think there is cookie cutter bonsai. I think they're all unique in their own way, as I've said many times. But you can definitely use or have these design concepts in the back of your mind, running on a repeat loop when you work with trees, that will certainly allow for a more dynamic and more interesting end game or next step in the evolutionary process of your bonsai. So that's it. Thanks for sticking around. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I really look forward to hearing from you if you've got any comments. There was a few that came up after the last podcast, and working on trees in the hottest day of the year. I'm not sure how we know which days of the year is the hottest until it's actually been, but if you've got any comments or anything you'd like to chat about, or just to reach out, then please feel free to via any of the socials for Bonsai Matsu. And until next time, I hope that you enjoy the time with your trees, and that they take that next step forward, and that you really get something out of them and make the most of your time with them. All right, see you later. Happy bonsai.